Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, theMathAficionado. Today's video is going to be the video on the chapter 2 of the Pre-Algebra course. Okay, so the chapter 2 basically is exploring and understanding the integers. For the list of the chapters, you can refer to my chapter outline video, or you can say the course outline video. I'll be putting that in the cards below and also at the top right of the video. So you can do go and check out that video. Okay, so this is going to be the video on the chapter 2 of the pre-algebra course, and the chapter here is exploring and understanding the integers. Okay, let's start. Okay, so now here in this chapter we are going to be discussing the three lessons. Okay, so those lessons are basically the lesson 1 is the absolute value. The lesson 2 would be adding and subtraction of integers, or you can say adding and subtracting the integers. And the lesson 3 would be multiplying and dividing. With the integers. Okay, so these are going to be the three lessons under this chapter, which is exploring and understanding the integers. Now let's quickly start with the first chapter, which is your lesson number 1, and that is absolute value. Okay, so when we start this lesson, so the first thing that comes to our mind is the absolute value. So what exactly is the absolute value? Okay, how do we find the absolute value? Okay, so absolute value is something which makes the negative integers also as positive. Okay, so everything which is negative, so it turns that into positive. Clear? For example, if I say, let's say if I have the absolute value of -3, so that is going to be +3. Okay, now you must be wondering that, okay, we got the point that absolute value makes everything negative to positive, but what happens to the positive integers in that case? Okay, so let's say if we apply the absolute value to a positive number, so what happens? So nothing happens, it still remains positive. Okay, so absolute value doesn't alter anything with the positive integers, but rather if the negative integers are input to the absolute function, so we can say that that is going to turn it to positive. Okay, now what happens when we have two absolute values either in addition or subtraction? So we'll be seeing next the examples based on that. Before that, I'll be showing you the same situation on the number line. Clear? So let's say if this is your number line, so now here we have 0, 1, 2, 3. On the negative side also we have -1, -2, -3. Correct? Now what was the situation in this case? Let's say if we have to label -3 on the number line, so that is going to be something here, right? And if we have to label +3 on the number line, so that is there, right? Correct? Now can I label this as -3 and this as +3? Yes. Now when we apply the absolute value to this, so now that is making it to +3. So if I have to label absolute value of -3, so that is going to be this. Okay, so the -3 which was here, Now when we apply the absolute value to -3, so that makes it +3. So now how do we represent the same on the number line? So that is going to be represented on the right. Clear? Okay, so the next we are going to see is how do we deal with the expressions wherein the addition of two absolute values are involved. Okay, so the example here is, let's say if we have to simplify the expression. What is the expression here? Absolute value of 3 plus absolute value of -3. So what is going to be the value? Now as we know that the positive remains positive, but the negative is also turned to positive. So 3 plus 3 would be 6. So in this case your answer is going to be 6. I hope that's clear. Okay, we'll see one more example wherein the subtraction is involved. This was your case of addition. Now the next we are going to see the case of subtraction. Okay, so let's say if you have absolute value of 4 plus absolute value of negative, sorry, since this is a case of subtraction, so we will have to do this. Negative absolute value of -3. So what is this going to be? Now positive remains positive, but the negative becomes positive. So it is going to be +4 minus 3, and that is 1. Clear? We could have taken another case of subtraction in the way that it was absolute value of -4 negative absolute value of -3. So now this would have been again positive subtraction, and then this is again positive, right? So this is going to be 4 minus 3, which is 1. I hope that makes sense. Yes. So this is how we deal with absolute value addition and subtraction. Okay. We'll take one last example in this lesson, and that is, now here I'm going to write the expression where instead of directly having the absolute value, we are going to have the absolute value of a variable. Okay, so absolute value with the variable, you can say x. Now let's say if you're given absolute value of x plus 11, okay, and the value of x is given as -9. Now how do you solve this? So what we are going to do is we'll substitute this here. So now this changes to -9 absolute value plus 11, and we know that absolute value makes everything positive, right? So this is going to be 9 plus 11, and that is 20. So your answer to this problem is 20. Clear? So what was the difference in this problem as compared to the previous one? So here we had a variable, okay, in the absolute value, and we were also given the value of the variable. So we substituted the value of the variable in the expression, and that's how we figured out the answer to the expression. Clear? So this was about your lesson number 1, which is absolute value. I hope the concept is clear to you now. Okay, so now let's move to the lesson number 2, which is a part of this chapter. Now what was your lesson number 2 in the first place? So lesson number 2 was adding and subtracting of integers. So let's start with that. Now as the name itself suggests, so what we are going to discuss in this chapter, in this lesson. So we'll be discussing the addition and the subtraction of the integers, obviously, right? So here we'll be discussing the addition of integers and also the subtraction of integers. Clear? Now let's start with the addition first. Okay, let's start with this one. Now when we talk about the addition of the integers, let's take an example here. Let's say if we have -4 plus -3. So we have to figure out what this addition leads to, or what is the solution to this addition. Okay, So first I'll show you the same via the number line, and then we will show it. We will see this one mathematically. Clear? So when I discuss about the scenario of the number line, so let's say if this is 0 here, -1, -2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is your number line here. Now when I represent the -4 here, so starting from 0 till -4, right? So this is your -4. And now what we are doing, we are adding -3 to -4. So that means when we talk about anything negative, we move left on the number line. Okay, so we are basically moving left on the number line. Now when you're adding another negative to that initial negative, which is -4 in this case, so you're basically adding -3 to the -4. So you're moving left further by 3 units. So that means you'll be adding -3 further. Okay, so what becomes the total here, starting from 0 till -7? So the total here is -7. So that becomes your answer. So this is how we figure out the solution of this problem, by making use of the number line. Okay, so one thing you have to notice here, or you have to remember here, is we start from 0 always. Okay, now if it is a negative, so we move to the left. If it is a positive, let's suppose if it was, let's say if it was +4 plus -3, so in that case we would have moved +4 here and then -3 here. Okay, so in that case what would have been the solution? What is left? 1. So here this would have been 1. So positive is moving right, negative is moving left. Clear? So this situation, the situation on the right, is indicating this problem. Clear? Okay, so the only thing that you have to remember here is you always start from 0. You don't start from anything else. You rather start from only 0. Okay. Now what would have been the case when it would have been -4 plus 3? How would we solve the same situation on the number line? So this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3, -4. Now how would we deal with this situation when you have -4 added with +3? Okay, so as I mentioned that negative is moving left on the number line and positive is moving right. So in this case, when we are concerned about -4, so we will be starting from 0 and moving left by 4 units. So this becomes your -4. Now after that it is +3, and as I mentioned earlier, the positive is moving right on the number line. So +3 means moving right from the point you have reached on the number line. Okay, so now since you have reached here, now you will be moving right by 3 points. So what's your final position? Okay, so this is your current position, this is your final position. And what was your start position? This was your start position, right? So now how far you are from your initial position? So it is -1, right? Now since it is on the left, so obviously it is going to be -1. Suppose if it was on the right, then it would have been +1. So the answer here is -1. I hope that makes sense. So this is how we solve the addition of the integers via the number line. Clear? Now this was addition of the integers. Now we can also have a situation where you'll be adding the integers with the variables. Okay, so what's the next situation? Adding integers and variables. So now in the previous case we just had integers where we were just adding the integers. Now here we'll be adding the integers as well as variables. Let's see how do we do this. I'll take the example. Let's say if you have 13x plus negative 2 of x and you have to find the solution to this one. So now what are the integers here? These are the integers. When I talk about 13 and negative 2, so these are integers. What are the variables here? So x here is a variable. Clear? Now since this problem is based on both integers and variables, so we'll be seeing how do we add the situation or how do we add in this case. Okay. So now here when I open the brackets, so this is going to be 13x minus 2x. Okay, so what I'll be doing is I'll pulling out the variable and combining both the integers, so that will be 13 minus 2. And we know that what is 13 minus 2? It is 11. So the answer would be 11 times x. Okay, so what we basically did is we pulled out the variable in the situation and combined both the integers. We simplified we solved for the integers and we got 11. So the answer became 11x. Clear? So this was all about the addition of the integers. Now let's cover subtraction. Now let's go to subtraction of the integers. So now when I talk about the subtraction, okay, so when we subtract something from something, so we try to figure out the difference between the two numbers, right? So when you subtract a negative number from any number, the difference is even bigger. What do I mean to say by this? Let's say if you are trying to subtract negative 150, which is a negative number, right? So you're trying to subtract a negative number from something, which is 3000. So what is that? What is happening here? So this negative is basically becoming positive. So this will become 3000 plus 150. And this is giving you 3150. So you see the answer here is bigger than the initial one, right? So when you try to subtract a negative number from something, the solution is even bigger than that something. Clear? Another example, let's say if we are subtracting negative 3 from 4, so what we are getting? 4 plus 3 and that is 7. Now here 7 is bigger than 4. Okay, and what you were doing here, you were trying to subtract a negative number from something, which is 4. Okay, so this is your subtraction. I hope that is making sense. So when we try to subtract a negative number from something, so that gives you even bigger number. Okay, but what would have been the situation? Let's say if this was something like this, then it would have been a normal subtraction, which is 4 minus 3, and that would have given you 1. Now this is smaller than the given number, or you can say smaller than the something that we had, which is 4. Okay, so now the situation is different. And also we are not combining two negatives unlike the previous one, which was making it positive. So here positive and negative still remains negative. Okay, that's why it's still leading to a subtraction, and that's why it is reducing your something value or your initial value, you can say. Okay, so what you have to keep in mind is two negatives make one positive. So the inference from this is two negatives make one positive. Okay, Let's take the final example on this lesson, which is -3 plus -6. Now what is plus and negative? That is still negative. So now this is going to give you -3, -6. Yes. And now we have already seen here from the number line. So let's say if this is your -3 and this is your -6. So what is -3? This. And then you're still moving 6 units to the left. So that means you're further going 6 units. Correct? So that is, let's say if this is -9. So you have got the total of 9 units on the left. Okay, so the answer here is negative. Clear? So this was about addition and the subtraction of integers. Okay, and that was your lesson number 2. We discussed about how do we add integers, how do we subtract integers. Okay, and what happens when you add, the situation wherein you have variables as well as integers, or you subtract when you have variables as well as integers. Okay, so here this was case of subtraction of addition of integers and variables. Okay, so here integers basically are getting subtracted. Why? Because we have addition with the negative sign for the second number. Okay, so plus minus becomes minus, so that's why it looks like subtraction, but eventually it is addition. Okay, so we have seen how do we add integers, how do we add in the case of integers and variables, then we have seen the subtraction. Okay, and we have also seen then when a negative number is subtracted from something, so that even gives you a bigger negative number, that even gives you a bigger number as a result. Okay, and I've given you the example of 3000 minus 150, so that will give you 3150. Okay, which is bigger than 3000, but that will not be the case when you're subtracting a positive number, which is this case, right? So here you will subtract a positive number from something, so that gave you a lesser number, which is 1. I hope that is clear. Now let's move to the lesson number 3, which is multiplication and division of integers. So what was your lesson number 3 in the first place? So that is multiplying and dividing with integers. Okay, so multiplying and dividing with integers. Okay, so we have already seen addition and subtraction. Now we'll be seeing the multiplication and division with the integers. Okay, so now what we have learned so far, that the signs are important, right? So when it is negative, so that makes a difference. When it is positive, that still makes a difference, right? So signs definitely make sense and they are important, correct? The same thing applies when it is multiplication and division. Still signs matter. Okay, so signs are important in the case of multiplication and division, also like addition and subtraction. So what are the simple ways to remember this thing? Okay, how do we remember this? Okay, so when we multiply a negative number by a positive number, so now this dot is basically a multiplication. Okay, so this is indicating a negative number and this is indicating a positive number. So let's say if you multiply a negative number by a positive number, then the product is always negative. Okay, so the product is always negative. Clear? So this you can take it as rule number 1. Now the second rule would be, if you multiply two negatives, let's say if you're multiplying two negatives, so what will be the product in that case? What will be the product in that case? It will be positive. So here this was your negative number, this was your negative number, and now that gave you the product of always positive. Okay, so now this is similar to the rule for addition and subtraction, wherein two minus signs were becoming positive, right? And whereas a plus and a minus was becoming minus, correct? So in multiplication and division, when you calculate the result, if there is no minus, then look at the signs to determine whether your result is positive or negative. I'll give you example that will make it more sense. Okay, let's take the first example of a positive number being multiplied with a negative number. So here positive number is 3, a negative number is negative 4. Now as we have seen that when you multiply a negative with a positive, so your product is negative. So in this case 3 multiplied with negative 4 will give you negative 12, which is a negative number. Okay, but what would have been a situation when you would have multiplied negative 3 with negative 4? Now here they both are negative. So as we have studied in the second case, when two negatives are multiplied, so we get the product as positive. So in this case it is going to be positive 12. Okay, so these are two essential rules wherein we discuss about the multiplications of two negatives or one negative with a one positive numbers. Clear? So this was about your multiplication of integers. Now let's move to division part. Let's move to the division part. Now when I talk about division, we can recall that the answer that we get by multiplying the quotient by the denominator. What do I mean to say by this? So basically when we perform a division, so we can verify the same by multiplying the quotient by the denominator of the division. Okay, or you can say the divisor of the division. Okay, I'll give you the example. What I'm trying to say is, let's say if 12 is divided by 3. So what is 12 here? Dividend. What is 3 here? Divisor. Right? And what do you get? 4. What is 4 here? Quotient. Now, if I have to verify that whether 4 was correct in the first place, what would I do? I'll verify by multiplying the quotient with the denominator, or you can say divisor. Okay, so I'll verify by multiplying the quotient by the denominator or the divisor. Clear? So what is the quotient here? 4. What is the denominator or divisor here? 3. So what do I get? 12. Wasn't 12 correct in the first place? Wasn't 12 the dividend in the first place? Yes. Okay, so 12 is what is coming from the dividend. Okay, so this exactly verifies that the division that we performed and the 4 that we got is perfectly correct. Okay, so this is how you can verify. Okay, now one more thing that you have learned here is, when we divided a positive by a positive, what did we get? A positive. So division, you can take it as rule number 1. So when a positive is divided by a positive, so you will get a positive result. Okay, now what is the next case? Let's say if you divide a negative by a negative, so what do we get in this case? When you divide a negative by a negative, what do you get? You still get a positive. Okay, I'll give you the example. Let's say instead of 12 it is negative 12, and instead of 3 let's say it is negative 3. So what you are going to get in this case? Positive 4. Okay, because this negative is going to cancel out and 3 divides 12 at 4. Okay, so your answer will still be positive. But the situation would turn when you have, now in the previous cases we have seen positive being divided by positive and negative being divided by negative, but the situation would be different. Let's say if positive is divided by negative or negative is divided by positive, so in both the cases you are going to have a negative result. Okay, for example, let's say if you are dividing 12 by negative 3 or negative 12 by positive 3, in the both cases you will get negative 4 as the answer. Clear? So the answer is only going to be positive when either both of them are positive. By both of them I mean to say numerator and denominator, or you can say dividend and divisor. Okay, so the answer is going to be positive in two cases, when either both of them are positive or when both of them are negative. But when one of them is positive and another one is negative, so the answer is going to be negative in that case. And I have given you examples for each of them. I hope that makes sense now. So this is what exactly happens in the case of division. Okay, same rules we could see in the case of multiplication also, right? So when we had two different signs being multiplied, so we had negative in the result. When we have two negative signs in the multiplication, so we had positive. Now you could have assumed that when we have positive multiplied with positive, so it's obvious that the result is still positive, right? The exact same rules we have discussed in the case of division as well. Okay, now we'll be concluding this lesson with a final example, and that is, let's say if you have negative 4 in multiplication of negative 12. So now here this is negative, this is negative. When two negatives are in multiplication, so the result is positive. That's what we have learned. So here in this case the result is positive for sure, right? Now what is that positive here? So 12 multiplied by 4 would be 48, so it's positive 48. Clear? Similarly, I'll take one last example of a division. Let's say if you have a negative 12 divided by 3, though I have taken this example already, but still I'll take it again. So negative 12 divided by 3, so here this is negative, this is positive. So when they are of the opposite signs, your result is always negative. So that is going to be negative 4. So this was all about the addition, sorry, this was all about the multiplication and division of the integers. Okay, wherein we have seen the three rules for each of them. Okay, and those three rules were based on what signs are you multiplying or what signs are you dividing for the integers. Okay, accordingly you will have a variable, accordingly you will have a different result. So I hope I've made myself clear enough on this lesson. Now that was all about your three lessons that we had as a part of this chapter. Okay, so the first one that we discussed was about your absolute value. Second one is your addition and the subtraction of the integers, and the third one is your multiplication and division of the integers. Okay, so this was all about chapter number 2, which was understanding the integers. Okay, now the third chapter, which we'll be covering in the next video, is all about inequalities and one-step equations. Again, I'm repeating that the list of the chapters as a part of this course, you'll get it in the course outline video of the Pre-Algebra. You can do check out that video, and I'll give that video in below in the cards, or you can say or you can get that video at the top right of the this video, and even in the recommendation at the end of this video. Okay, so that was all about this video. Okay, I hope you understood what I tried to convey, and if you found this helpful, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Your support is what motivates me to keep creating such content with love and dedication. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts. Please let me know in the comments how you like this video, and if you have any suggestions, please do let me know in the comments as well. Okay, so that I can improve with every video and I can make myself more clear on the concepts that I'm teaching. Okay, so that was all about this. Thank you so much.